In the depths of space, on a quiet mining colony, humanity's most vulnerable were targeted in a brutal massacre. 800,000 innocent children lost to the cold, ruthless hands of the Crythian Dominion. Their blood stains the stars, and now, humanity's heart burns with an unquenchable fury. Captain Sarah Chun, driven by a personal loss, stands at the crossroads of vengeance and survival. With the galaxy watching, Earth sends out a warning. A declaration that no one will escape the consequences of underestimating humanity. What follows is not just a fight for survival, but a testament to the lengths humanity will go to when pushed to the brink. This is the Crythian ultimatum, and when we strike, they will remember that we are not a species to be taken lightly. Children of the stars, the morning sun of Kepler, for 42, be cast long shadows across the mining colony as 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez ran through the corridors of the education center, her laughter echoing off the polished metal walls. She was late for her xenobiology class, but the excitement of learning about the strange creatures they had discovered in the planet's underground caverns made her forget about punctuality. Behind her, dozens of other children hurried to their various classes, their voices creating a symphony of youthful energy that had become the heartbeat of New Harmony Colony. Captain Sarachin stood in the observation deck of the orbital station, watching the sunrise paint the planet's surface in shades of gold and amber. The mining operation had been running smoothly for 3 years now, and the colony had grown from a small outpost to a thriving community of nearly 2 million souls. What made her proudest was seeing the families that had made this distant world their home. The laughter of children playing in the parks, the couples walking hand in hand through the botanical gardens, the elderly sharing stories on the community center porches. It all represented humanity's greatest strength, the ability to create hope and life even in the vastness of space. Her peaceful morning was shattered by the urgent beeping of her communication device. Lieutenant Commander Jackson's voice crackled through the static, heavy with an emotion she had never heard from a veteran officer before. Captain Chun, we have multiple, unidentified vessels approaching the system. They're not responding to our hails, and their energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Crythian Dominion had been expanding their territory for the past decade, consuming entire star systems and enslaving or eliminating any species that stood in their way. Humanity had managed to avoid direct conflict so far, but intelligence reports suggested it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed. How many ships, Commander? 17 confirmed, possibly more. They're moving in attack formation, Captain. This doesn't look like a diplomatic mission. Sarah ran to the command center, her heart pounding as she issued orders to prepare the colony's defenses. The orbital platforms were designed to protect against pirates and asteroid impacts, not a full-scale military assault. As she reached the command center, the tactical display showed the approaching fleet in all its terrifying glory. The Crythian vessels were massive, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with an otherworldly energy that seemed to bend light around them. "Open a channel to the lead vessel," Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Colony New Harmony. You are approaching sovereign human territory. State your intentions." The response came in the form of a holographic projection that materialized in the center of the command center. The creature that appeared was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, the Crythian had a chitinous exoskeleton that shifted between deep purple and black, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws. Its head was dominated by compound eyes that seemed to see into the soul, while mandibles clicked with anticipation. "I am General Fax of the Crythian Dominion." The creature spoke through a universal translator, its voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Your species has been deemed a potential threat to the natural order of this galaxy. The Dominion has decided that humanity must be managed." Sarah stepped forward, her military training taking over. "We are peaceful colonists, General. We seek no conflict with your people. Perhaps we can find a diplomatic solution to whatever concerns you have about our presence here." The general's mandibles clicked in what the humans would later learn was laughter. Diplomacy is for equals, Captain. You are insects compared to the might of the Dominion. However, we are not unreasonable. We offer you a choice. Surrender your entire species to serve as laborers in our expansion, or we will demonstrate the consequences of defiance. And if we refuse both options, Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer, then we will show the galaxy what happens to those who dare to resist the Dominion's will. We will start with your most precious resource, your offspring. Consider this a lesson in the futility of resistance. The hologram disappeared, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Sarah's mind raced as she processed the threat. The Crithians weren't just planning to attack the colony, they were specifically targeting the children. She opened a colony-wide communication channel, her voice carrying across every home, school, and workplace on the planet. This is Captain Chun to all residents of New Harmony. We are under immediate threat from an alien force. All children are to be evacuated to the underground shelters immediately. This is not a drill. All able-bodied adults are to report to designated defensive positions. We will not surrender our home without a fight. What followed was a desperate 3-hour battle that would be remembered as one of the darkest days in human history. The Crithian forces bypassed the adult defenders with surgical precision, their advanced technology allowing them to penetrate the colony's defenses and target the evacuation shelters with ruthless efficiency. The biomechanical weapons they employed were designed not just to kill, but to cause maximum psychological trauma to the survivors. Sarah watched in horror from her command post as the enemy forces systematically destroyed every shelter, every school, every place where children might have hidden. The Crithians made no attempt to capture or enslave. They simply eliminated every human being under the age of 18 they could find. The precision of their attack was terrifying in its implications. This wasn't random violence, it was a calculated message. When the attack ended, the silence that fell over New Harmony was deafening. Of the 800,000 children who had been living on the planet, none survived. The Crithians had achieved their goal with terrifying efficiency, leaving behind a colony of broken adults who had watched their future die before their eyes as the enemy fleet withdrew. General Fax appeared one final time. Let this be a lesson to all who would defy the Dominion. Your children are gone, but you adults remain to carry word of this day back to your homeworld. Tell them that this is the fate that awaits any species that refuses to submit. You have one standard galactic year to surrender your entire species, or we will visit every human world with the same efficiency we showed here today. The days that followed were a blur of grief and evacuation. The surviving colonists were transported back to Earth, their testimonies spreading like wildfire through human space. The images and recordings from New Harmony became a rallying cry that united humanity in a way that nothing had before. The loss of 800,000 children in a single day was a wound that would never heal, but it also forged a resolve that would reshape the galaxy, Doctor. Marcus Vale stood in the emergency session of the United Earth Council, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely contained rage. As the leading xenobiologist in human space, he had spent his career studying alien species with the hope of finding common ground for peaceful coexistence. The Crithian massacre had shattered those idealistic dreams. The Crithians have made their position clear. He addressed the assembled leaders. They view us as a threat to be eliminated, not as potential allies or even useful slaves. Their targeting of our children was specifically designed to break our will to resist. They want us to live in fear, to surrender our freedom in exchange for the promise that they won't repeat what happened at New Harmony. Admiral Rosa Torres, the head of Earth's military forces, stood to address the council. Her weathered face bore the scars of a lifetime spent defending humanity's interests, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment. The Crithian Dominion controls approximately 40% of this galaxy's habitable star systems. Their military technology is centuries ahead of ours. By every conventional measure, we cannot win a direct conflict with them. The chamber fell silent as the weight of her words settled over the assembled leaders. Earth's President, Maria Santos, leaned forward in her chair. What options do we have, Admiral? We cannot simply surrender our entire species to slavery. We have one advantage, Torres replied. The Crithians underestimate us. They see us as primitive beings driven by emotion rather than strategy. They expect us to either surrender in fear or launch a futile revenge attack that they can easily defeat. We're going to do neither. Dr. Vale nodded in agreement. My analysis of the Crithian behavior patterns suggests they rely heavily on fear as a tool of control. They've never faced a species that refused to be intimidated. We need to turn their own tactics against them. Engineer Zara Okafor, barely 30 years old, but already recognized as one of humanity's most brilliant minds, spoke up from the back of the chamber. I've been analyzing the recordings from the attack. The Crithian ships have advanced shielding and weapons, but they're not invincible. Their technology is biomechanical, which means it's vulnerable to the right kind of interference. If we can develop countermeasures, we might be able to level the playing field. President Santos looked around the chamber, seeing the determination in every face. The loss of 800,000 children had awakened something primal in humanity, the fierce protectiveness of a species that would go to any lengths to defend its young. What do you propose? Admiral Torres activated a holographic display showing the galaxy's trade routes and communication networks. We send a message to every inhabited world in the galaxy. We tell them exactly what the Crithians did to our children. We tell them that we will not surrender and we will not forget. We give them a choice: stand with us against tyranny or watch as the Dominion comes for their children next. And then the president asked, then we show the galaxy that humanity doesn't just survive, we thrive in the face of adversity. We turn this massacre into the catalyst for the Crithian Dominion's downfall. They wanted to make an example of us, and we're going to make sure they succeed, just not in the way they intended. The message that went out from Earth 3 days later was broadcast on every communication frequency known to galactic civilization. President Santos herself delivered it, her voice carrying the weight of a species that had been pushed beyond its breaking point. People of the galaxy, I am Maria Santos, President of the United Earth Government. 3 days ago, the Crithian Dominion murdered 800,000 of our children in an unprovoked attack on our peaceful colony. They did this not for resources, not for territory, but to send a message of fear. They want us to surrender our freedom, our dignity, and our future to their tyrannical rule. The image shifted to show the devastation at New Harmony, the empty playgrounds and silent schools serving as a monument to the Crithian cruelty. But humanity has a message of our own. We do not surrender, we do not forget, and we do not forgive those who harm our children. The broadcast continued with testimonies from survivors, recordings of the attack, and evidence of the Crithians' systematic campaign of genocide across the galaxy. But the most powerful moment came at the end, when President Santos looked directly into the camera and spoke with the quiet certainty of a species that had found its purpose. General facts, you and your Dominion wanted to show the galaxy what happens to those who resist your will. You succeeded. The galaxy is about to learn what happens when you threaten humanity's children. You have made the greatest mistake in the history of your species. You have awakened a sleeping giant, and we are coming for you. The broadcast ended with a single image that would become the symbol of the human resistance, the empty swing set from New Harmony Central Park, swaying gently in the wind beneath the alien stars. It was a reminder of what had been lost, and a promise of what would be avenged. As the message spread across the galaxy, something unprecedented began to happen. Species that had cowered before the Crithian Dominion for generations began to whisper of resistance. Trade routes that had been closed to human ships suddenly opened. Resources and intelligence began flowing toward human space from worlds that had suffered under Crithian rule. The massacre at New Harmony had been intended to break humanity's spirit. Instead, It had ignited a flame that would burn across the galaxy, lighting the way for every species that yearned for freedom. The Crithians had wanted to make an example of humanity, and they had succeeded beyond their wildest nightmares. The children of New Harmony would never be forgotten, and their deaths would not be in vain. The galaxy was about to learn that some things are worth fighting for, and some prices are too high to pay for peace. Humanity had spoken, and the stars themselves seemed to tremble with the promise of what was to come. Shadows in the void 6 months after the massacre at New Harmony, the galaxy had changed in ways that few could have predicted. The human message had reached every corner of civilized space, and the response had been swift and decisive. The Crithian Dominion, which had ruled through fear for centuries, suddenly found itself facing something they had never encountered before: organized resistance. General Thax stood in the command chamber of his flagship, the Devourer of Worlds, watching the holographic displays with growing concern. Reports were flooding in from across the Dominion's territory of supply convoys that had simply vanished, communication networks that had been mysteriously severed, and outposts that had gone dark without explanation. The humans, it seemed, had not been broken by the demonstration at New Harmony. How many incidents in the past month? He asked his subordinate, Commander Vex, whose own chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles. 47 confirmed attacks, General. The humans are using technology we don't understand. Our ships detect no energy signatures, no ion trails, nothing that would indicate the presence of enemy vessels. They appear, strike, and vanish like ghosts. Thax's mandibles clicked in irritation. The Crithian Dominion had conquered dozens of species, and all had followed the same pattern: initial resistance, desperate last stands, and eventual submission. The humans were different. Instead of massing their forces for a heroic but futile final battle, they had seemingly disappeared into the void itself. Double the patrols in the outer systems, Thax ordered, and increase the security around our breeding worlds. If the humans think they can threaten our young as we threaten theirs, they will learn the true meaning of retaliation. Meanwhile, in a hidden facility buried deep within the asteroid belt of the Sol system, engineer Zara Okafor put the finishing touches on humanity's greatest innovation. The laboratory was a marvel of engineering, carved into the heart of a massive asteroid and shielded from detection by layers of advanced technology that bent light and energy around it like a cosmic invisibility cloak. Final systems check complete, she announced to the assembled team of engineers and scientists. The shadow drive is ready for deployment. Admiral Torres stood behind her, watching the sleek black vessel that hung in the center of the chamber. The US Phantom looked more like a piece of abstract art than a warship, its hull composed of materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But appearances were deceiving. This ship represented the culmination of human ingenuity, a vessel that could move through space without leaving any trace of its passage. How many can we build? Torres asked. With current resources, we can have 12 operational within 6 months, Zara replied. Each one can carry a crew of 30 and enough firepower to take out a Crithian heavy cruiser. They won't be able to fight the entire Dominion fleet, but they can strike at targets of opportunity and disappear before the enemy can respond. Dr. Marcus Vale approached the group, his tablet displaying the latest intelligence reports. I've been analyzing the Crithian responses to our attacks. They're increasing patrols and strengthening defenses, but they're doing so in predictable patterns. They're a rigid hierarchical society that depends on centralized command and control. If we can identify their communication hubs and supply nodes, we can cripple their ability to coordinate their forces. Captain Sarah Chun, who had been silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. What about their breeding worlds? They targeted our children specifically. Maybe it's time we return the favor. The room fell silent at her words. The loss of her own daughter in the New Harmony massacre had changed Sarah in ways that went beyond the physical scars she bore. The warm, compassionate officer who had once commanded a peaceful mining colony had been replaced by someone harder, colder, and utterly focused on making the Crithians pay for their crimes. Sarah, Dr. Vale said gently, "We're not them. We don't target civilians, especially children." "They're not civilians," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the weight of months of grief and rage. "Prithian young are born warriors. They're trained from birth to kill and conquer. Every one of them will grow up to be a soldier in their campaign of genocide. We have a choice. We can maintain our moral high ground and watch as they eventually overwhelm us through sheer numbers, or we can fight to win." Admiral Torres understood the captain's pain, but she also understood the bigger picture. Our strength comes from being better than they are. The moment we start targeting their young, we become the monsters they claim we are. We need allies in this fight, and we won't get them by becoming as ruthless as the Prithians. The debate continued for hours, but eventually a compromise was reached. The human fleet would target military installations, supply lines, and communication networks. They would avoid civilian casualties when possible, but the gloves were off when it came to anything that supported the Prithian war machine. The first official mission of the Ghost Fleet launched 3 weeks later. Captain Sarah Chun commanded the UES Phantom, while the other 11 ships spread out across Prithian space like a dark constellation of revenge. Their target was the Vorthan system, a major hub for Prithian military communications that coordinated fleet movements across 3 sectors. The Phantom approached the system, using a trajectory that would take it through the outer asteroid belt, its shadow drive rendering it invisible to conventional sensors. Sarah stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display as they closed in on their target. The Prithian communication station was a massive structure built into the largest moon of Vorthan Prime and heavily defended by automated weapon systems. Approaching optimal firing position, reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson, who had volunteered to serve as Sarah's tactical officer. "All weapons armed and ready." Sarah nodded, her finger hovering over the firing control. "Remember, we're not just attacking a military target. We're sending a message. Fire." The Phantom's weapons systems unleashed a barrage of plasma torpedoes and particle beam weapons that tore through the Prithian station's defenses like paper. The precision of the attack was surgical, targeting the communication arrays and power generators while leaving the life support systems intact. The station went dark within minutes, its ability to coordinate Prithian forces across the sector completely destroyed. But the real message came next. As the Phantom prepared to leave the system, Sarah activated the ship's communication array and broadcast a message on the same frequency the Prithians had used to announce their ultimatum to humanity. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Ghost Fleet. The communication hub at Vorthan is the first of many targets we will destroy. General facts. You wanted to show the galaxy what happens to those who resist the Dominion. Now we're going to show you what happens when you threaten humanity's children. We are coming for you, and we will not stop until every Prithian military installation in the galaxy is nothing but space debris." The message was broadcast across the galaxy, and the response was immediate. On worlds that had been conquered by the Prithians, oppressed populations began to whisper of hope. Species that had been forced into servitude started to organize resistance movements. The psychological impact of the attack was far greater than its strategic value. Over the following months, the Ghost Fleet struck again and again, each attack more daring than the last. They destroyed supply convoys carrying weapons to the front lines, eliminated communication relays that coordinated planetary defenses, and sabotaged manufacturing facilities that produced Prithian war machines. The Dominion's response was swift and brutal, but they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see or predict. The breakthrough came when engineer Zara Okafor made a discovery that would change the course of the war. While analyzing captured Prithian technology, she noticed something odd about their biomechanical components. The organic parts of their systems were connected through a network of neural pathways that resembled a brain more than a computer. "It's incredible," she explained to Dr. Vale as they studied the dissected remains of a Prithian weapon. "Their technology isn't just biomechanical, it's literally alive. These ships, these weapons, they're not just tools. They're extensions of the Prithian consciousness itself." Dr. Vale's eyes widened as he understood the implications. If their technology is alive, then it can be killed. More importantly, it can be made to suffer. The revelation led to the development of humanity's most devastating weapon, the neural disruption virus. Unlike conventional weapons that simply destroyed their targets, the NDV was designed to attack the living components of Krithian technology, causing their own ships and weapons to turn against them. The first test of the weapon came during a major battle in the Proxima Sector, where a Krithian fleet had been sent to eliminate a human supply convoy. The Ghost Fleet ships, armed with the new weapon, engaged the enemy in what appeared to be a conventional battle. But as the fight progressed, something extraordinary happened. The Krithian ships began to malfunction in ways that defied explanation. Weapons turned on their own vessels, navigation systems sent ships crashing into each other, and life support systems began to fail. The proud Krithian fleet was reduced to a collection of drifting hulks within hours, their crews dying in the cold vacuum of space. General Fax received reports with growing horror. The humans had found a way to turn the Dominion's greatest strength against itself. The biomechanical technology that had given them dominance over the galaxy was now a weakness that could be exploited. How is this possible? He demanded of his science advisors. The neural networks in our ships are encrypted and protected. No outside force should be able to access them. The humans have developed something beyond our understanding, one of his advisors replied. They're not just attacking our technology, they're attacking the life force that powers it. It's as if they've weaponized death itself. The psychological impact of the neural disruption virus was even greater than its tactical effectiveness. Krithian crews began to fear their own ships, knowing that at any moment their trusted technology could turn against them. Morale plummeted as reports spread of vessels that had become floating tombs, their crews trapped inside while their own life support systems slowly murdered them. But the humans weren't finished. Dr. Vale's research had revealed something even more devastating about Krithian society. Their rigid hierarchical structure was maintained through a complex system of pheromone-based communication that kept the lower castes in line. If that system could be disrupted, the entire Dominion might collapse from within. The plan was ambitious beyond anything humanity had attempted before. Using their network of allies and resistance movements, they would infiltrate the Krithian homeworld itself and release a modified version of the neural disruption virus directly into the atmosphere. The virus would target the pheromone-producing glands of the Krithian leadership, effectively severing their control over their own people. Captain Sarachin volunteered to lead the mission personally. Standing before the assembled crews of the Ghost Fleet, she addressed them with the same determination that had carried humanity through its darkest hour. 800,000 children died at New Harmony because the Krithians wanted to make an example of us. Today, we make an example of them. We show the galaxy that tyrants can be defeated, that freedom is worth fighting for, and that humanity will never again allow innocent children to be slaughtered in the name of fear. The mission to infiltrate the Krithian homeworld would be the most dangerous operation in human history. But as the Ghost Fleet prepared to depart, every member of the crew knew that they were fighting for something greater than themselves. They were fighting for the memory of those who had died, for the freedom of those who still lived, and for the promise that no other species would ever have to endure what humanity had suffered. The Krithians had awakened a sleeping giant, and now that giant was fully awake. The galaxy would never be the same. When giants fall, the Krithian homeworld of Dominax Prime had never been threatened by an enemy force. For over 1,000 years, it had stood as the unshakable center of the galaxy's most powerful empire, its biomechanical defenses considered impenetrable by any known force. The planet's surface was a nightmare landscape of towering spires that pulsed with organic energy, connected by bridges of living metal that could reshape themselves at will. This was the heart of the Dominion, and it was here that humanity would make its final stand. Captain Sarachin stood on the bridge of the UES Phantom as it approached the outer edge of the Dominax system. Her Ghost Fleet spread out in a formation that would have been invisible to any conventional sensor array. The neural disruption virus had been loaded into specialized delivery systems that would disperse it throughout the planet's atmosphere, but first they had to get past the most heavily defended star system in the galaxy. Status report, she called out to her crew. Multiple defense platforms detected, reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson. At least 50 orbital stations, each one armed with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The Krithians have also deployed a biomechanical minefield that extends for millions of kilometers around the planet. Dr. Marcus Vale studied the tactical display with growing concern. Those mines aren't just explosive devices. They're alive. They can track movement, adapt to different attack patterns, and even reproduce if given enough time. We're looking at a defensive system that learns and evolves. Engineer Zara Okafor's fingers flew across her control panel as she analyzed the enemy defenses. The good news is that our shadow drive technology should allow us to pass through the minefield undetected. The bad news is that once we start the attack, we'll have about 10 minutes before the entire system mobilizes against us. Sarah nodded grimly. 10 minutes to penetrate the defenses of the galaxy's most powerful empire, deploy a weapon that had never been tested on this scale, and escape before being obliterated by overwhelming force. The odds were impossibly long. But then again, humanity had been facing impossible odds since the day the Krithians had first appeared in their space. All ships maintain formation and prepare for insertion, Sarah commanded. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every species that has suffered under Krithian rule. We're fighting for the children of New Harmony, and we're fighting for the future of the galaxy itself. The Ghost Fleet moved through the biomechanical minefield like ghosts through a graveyard, their shadow drive technology bending reality around them to avoid detection. The living mines pulsed with alien intelligence, their organic sensors sweeping the void for any sign of intruders, but the human ships remained invisible to their alien senses. As they approached the planet's upper atmosphere, the full scope of the Krithian defenses became apparent. The orbital stations were massive structures that resembled a cross between a space station and a living organism, their surfaces covered in weapon emplacements that could track and destroy targets across vast distances. Below them, the planet's surface bristled with defensive installations that could launch swarms of biomechanical fighters at a moment's notice. Beginning atmospheric insertion, reported the pilot of the lead Ghost Fleet vessel. Deploying virus canisters in 3, 2, 1, the canisters fell through the atmosphere like silver rain, each one designed to disperse the neural disruption virus across a specific area of the planet. The weapon itself was invisible and odorless, designed to target the specific pheromone-producing glands that allowed the Krithian leadership to control their population. If the plan worked, the rigid hierarchy that held the Dominion together would collapse within hours. For a moment, it seemed as though the attack might succeed undetected. The virus canisters deployed their payload without triggering any alarms, and the Ghost Fleet began to withdraw toward the outer system. But then, something went wrong. One of the orbital defense platforms suddenly came alive, its biomechanical sensors detecting the faint energy signature of the dispersing virus. Alarms began to sound across the entire system as the Krithian defenses realized they were under attack. "We've been detected," Jackson called out. "Multiple contacts converging on our position. They're launching everything they have." The space around the Ghost Fleet exploded into chaos as hundreds of Krithian fighters swarmed toward them like angry insects. The biomechanical ships were faster and more maneuverable than anything in the human fleet, their living hulls allowing them to change direction and speed in ways that defied conventional physics. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing dread as the enemy forces closed in. The Ghost Fleet was outnumbered 1,000 to 1, and their stealth technology was useless now that the Krithians knew they were there. This was the moment she had been preparing for since the massacre at New Harmony, the moment when humanity's fate would be decided. "All ships, engage at will," she commanded. "Make every shot count." The battle that followed was unlike anything in the history of warfare. The human ships fought with the desperation of a species that had nothing left to lose, their weapons systems unleashing torrents of energy that tore through the Krithian fighters like a cosmic storm. But for every enemy ship they destroyed, 10 more took its place. The US Phantom shuddered under the impact of biomechanical weapons that seemed to eat through its armor plating. Sarah felt the ship's pain as if it were her own, the advanced neural interfaces that connected the crew to their vessel, allowing her to experience every hit, every system failure, every moment of agony as her ship slowly died around her. Hull breach on Deck 7, reported the damage control officer. Life support is failing in sections 12 through 15. We're losing atmosphere fast. Sarah's hands tightened on her command chair as she watched her fellow Ghost Fleet ships falling one by one. The UES Wraith exploded in a brilliant flash of light, taking its crew of 30 brave souls with it. The UES Spectre was torn apart by a swarm of biomechanical fighters, its hull splitting open like a ripe fruit to spill its contents into the void. But even as humanity's finest ships were being destroyed, something extraordinary was happening on the planet below. The neural disruption virus was spreading through the Crithian population with devastating efficiency, targeting the pheromone glands that maintained their social order. Without the chemical signals that kept the lower castes in line, the rigid hierarchy that had held the Dominion together for 1,000 years was beginning to collapse. General Fax stood in his command center on the planet's surface, watching in horror as his own troops began to turn on each other. The virus wasn't just disrupting their ability to communicate, it was driving them into a frenzy of rage and confusion. Crithian warriors who had fought side by side for decades were now tearing each other apart with their bare claws. "What is happening to my forces?" he demanded of his science advisors, but the advisors themselves were beginning to show signs of the virus's effects. Their movements were becoming erratic, their responses confused and aggressive. On the bridge of the dying Phantom, Dr. Marcus Vale monitored the bio readings from the planet below with grim satisfaction. "It's working," he reported to Sarah. "The virus is spreading faster than we anticipated. The Crithian command structure is completely breaking down." Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on the tactical display. Only 3 Ghost Fleet ships remained operational, and they were completely surrounded by enemy forces. The mission had succeeded, but none of them would live to see the results. "All ships, this is Captain Chun," she broadcast on the fleet-wide channel. "We've accomplished our objective. The Crithian Dominion is finished. It's been an honor serving with you all." As if responding to her words, the remaining Crithian forces seemed to sense that something fundamental had changed. The coordinated attacks became more erratic, the biomechanical ships beginning to malfunction as the virus spread through their living components. But there were still enough of them to finish off the human survivors. It was then that engineer Zara Okafor made the ultimate sacrifice. "Captain," she called from the engine room, "I can overload the shadow drive. The resulting explosion should take out most of the enemy fighters in this sector, but you won't survive," Sarah finished. "Zara, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," Zara replied, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Those children at New Harmony, they deserved better than what they got. This is for them." The explosion that followed lit up the entire star system. The overloaded shadow drive created a cascade reaction that tore through spacetime itself, creating a brief but devastating rift that consumed hundreds of Crithian ships. Zara Okafor died as she had lived, pushing the boundaries of human innovation to protect those she cared about. The remaining Ghost Fleet ships used the confusion to make their escape, but Sarah knew they wouldn't get far. The Phantom was dying, its systems failing one by one as the biomechanical weapons continued to eat through its hull. She looked around at her crew, the men and women who had followed her on this impossible mission, and felt a surge of pride that transcended the pain of their impending death. "It's been an honor," she said quietly, but fate had one more surprise in store for humanity. As the surviving Ghost Fleet ships limped toward the edge of the system, they were suddenly surrounded by a massive fleet of alien vessels. For a moment, Sarah thought the Crithians had somehow managed to coordinate one final attack, but then she saw the markings on the ships, and her heart leaped with hope. The Veltar Confederacy, the Zephyrian Alliance, the Quantum Collective, dozens of species that had suffered under Crithian rule had finally found the courage to act. They had been watching the battle from the edge of the system, waiting to see if humanity could accomplish the impossible. Now, with the Crithian command structure collapsing and their forces in disarray, The oppressed peoples of the galaxy had come to finish what humanity had started. This is Admiral Velturan of the Confederacy Fleet, came a transmission in perfect human English. Captain Chun, your species has given us something we thought was lost forever. Hope. Allow us to return the favor. What followed was not so much a battle as an execution. The combined fleets of a dozen species fell upon the disorganized Krithian forces like a tide of justice that had been held back for far too long. Ships that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were torn apart by weapons that their builders had never imagined could be turned against them. On Dominax Prime, General Thax watched his empire crumble from the windows of his command center. The virus had spread beyond the military caste to affect the entire population. Krithian society, built on rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience, could not survive without the pheromone-based control system that had maintained order for millennium. Riots had broken out in every major city, and the biomechanical infrastructure was beginning to shut down as the living components succumbed to the neural disruption. It appears your species was more formidable than we anticipated, he said to an empty room, his own mind beginning to fog as the virus reached his personal quarters. Perhaps we should have, the general's words trailed off as the neural disruption virus completed its work. The architect of humanity's greatest tragedy collapsed to the floor of his command center, his last thoughts filled with regret for the sleeping giant his people had foolishly awakened. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of a Veltar medical ship 3 days later, her body wrapped in regenerative bandages, but her spirit finally at peace. Through the viewport, she could see the remains of the Krithian fleet drifting in space like a graveyard of broken dreams. The dominion that had terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years was finished, its power broken by a species they had tried to intimidate into submission. Admiral Torres approached from behind, her own injuries evident but not life-threatening. The casualty reports are coming in. We lost over half the Ghost Fleet, including some of our best people. But the Krithians, they're finished. Their entire empire is collapsing as the virus spreads from world to world. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained somber. What about the civilians? The Krithian populations that had nothing to do with the military's decisions? The virus is non-lethal to them, Dr. Vale reported as he joined the group. They'll lose their ability to maintain their hierarchical society, but they'll survive. Most of the Krithian worlds are already requesting aid from the galactic community. It seems they want to rebuild their civilization along more peaceful lines. The irony was not lost on any of them. Humanity had set out to destroy an empire, but in the end, they had liberated its people as well. The neural disruption virus had not just broken the Krithian military machine, it had freed an entire species from a social system that had turned them into conquerors and killers. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the memorial garden on Earth, surrounded by 800,000 flowering trees that had been planted in memory of the children who died at New Harmony. Each tree bore a plaque with the name and photo of one of the victims, their young faces smiling up at visitors with the eternal optimism of childhood. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The collapse of the Krithian Dominion had created a power vacuum that was being filled by a new galactic federation based on cooperation rather than conquest. Humanity had taken its place as one of the founding members, but their role was not as conquerors or rulers. They were the guardians, the species that others looked to when bullies needed to be stopped and tyrants needed to be humbled. Dr. Vale approached through the garden paths, carrying a data pad with the latest reports from across human space. The Reconstruction Committee has approved funding for 50 new colonies, he reported. The Veltar have offered to share their terraforming technology, and the Zephyrians want to establish joint research stations. It seems the galaxy is eager to work with us now. Sarah smiled as she touched the bark of a young oak tree that had been planted in memory of her own daughter. Emma would have loved to see this. All of them would have. They died believing in a better future, and now we're finally building it. Do you think it will last? Vale asked, this peace we've fought so hard to achieve? Sarah looked up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the evening sky. each one representing countless worlds where children could now grow up without fear of conquest or slavery. As long as there are those willing to stand up to bullies, as long as there are those who remember the price of freedom, it will last. The children of New Harmony taught us that some things are worth dying for. Now, we have to make sure their sacrifice teaches the galaxy that some things are worth living for as well. The memorial garden grew quiet as night fell, but the light from the stars above seemed brighter than ever before. Humanity had sent its warning to the galaxy, and the galaxy had listened. The age of empires built on fear and oppression was ending, and a new era of cooperation and hope was beginning. The children of New Harmony would never be forgotten, but more importantly, their deaths had ensured that no other children would suffer the same fate. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all, not the destruction of an empire, but the birth of a future where the innocent could sleep safely under alien stars. The galaxy had learned what happened when you threatened humanity's children. Now, it was time to learn what humanity could accomplish when it worked to protect everyone's children. The sleeping giant was fully awake, and it was building a better tomorrow for all.